Hey, shalom, guys. Welcome to another book review today. I have back with me, which way am I going? I'm pointing this way. Dr. Ryan Mullins, thank you for coming back on again. If you guys can, I have an interview with Dr. Ryan Mullins where we talk about a lot of philosophical ideas regarding Christianity, early Christianity, to even some in Judaism. That was super cool. I hit Dr. Ryan Mullins with a lot of random questions. I hope they were interesting to ask you. You gave awesome responses. But today we're here to talk about one of your newest books. I know you came out with a newer one recently, but this one is Eternal in Love, a little book about a big God. And, I've told Dr. Ryan Mullins, I've told you this in private, and I'll kind of tell everyone, I'm not a fan of philosophy. I feel like a lot of people make it intimidating. It come up with kind of some weird concepts that kind of make it doctrinal, and it kind of gets messy. I'm a fan of you, though. So a lot of your articles that you've written, and that's why when I heard you're coming out with this book, I was really interested. I'm like, I love this guy's writing. So I'm not a fan of the topic, but I love when he writes stuff about it. So picking up this book, I was excited, and I got to tell you, when I first was reading this book, I was like, okay, cool. It seemed like you were basically starting from like a ground zero. Like, let's just ask, like I don't want to say entry level, because this is not entry level. I had to Google a lot of the words that you used because I'm not as smart as you. But it was very entry level, and I use that very vaguely. But as you go on, I want to say the last 3 chapters were really interesting concepts, stuff that I've never even heard about. It's in the questions of stuff I want you to also expound upon for people who are possibly interested in getting this book, because it was really interesting. It's almost like a movie you're watching. It's like, okay, it's interesting. It's like, I was really blown away by a lot of the concepts and ideas that you brought forward. And it went from like, okay, this is a beginner level. And then it's just like, holy crap. I feel like I just went from like kindergarten to college, going for my doctorate now, this type of understanding.
Yeah.
Great book. Seriously, congratulations for putting this together. Seriously.
Yeah. Thank you. No, like, 'cause this was a big effort, and yeah, I like hearing all the different feedback, because a lot of people have told me how easy it was to get into the book, and when it starts going really deep, they were able to say, "I can still keep following along," and I was like, "Good. That's really good to hear."
No, and there are some other books by other people that I've read that I've enjoyed, that I've had to read the pages like 3 times over to just
Mhm.
like, okay, this is okay. I'm trying to like, you're from A to B to C to D. It's like, okay. And then, and then there's a lot of notes, a lot of references that you make, which also support your claims, which I love. I love it when authors do that. When I don't see the notes on the bottom of the page and it's just all like opinion
Oh, and
based,
the oh yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
it's like, is there like anybody else that you can say back up your opinion and thoughts? And it's cool seeing that with yours. And it was a very nice read. It was I don't want to say it was an easy read, because you bring up so many um different ideas, and the language that you use. Now, when I say it's not an easy read, I'm not saying that like, for instance, I guess when I say easy read, a 5th grade reading level, that's an
Mhm.
easy read.
Sure. Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not that, but it was very good. Very few did I have to kind of like reread. I really understood where you were coming from with the stuff. And again, this is someone coming from someone who, I'm not a big philosophy guy, but I loved your articles that you've done before. I wanted to give this book a read. And I mean, this was a really nice book, to a lot of just understanding and asking the hard and difficult questions, and you pulling up different concepts. um I mean, seriously, it's like, bravo, this
Hmm.
fantastic.
That's great. Yeah, because I teach for a university in Switzerland, and so I've got a lot of international students. So most of the time, English is their second language or third language, fourth in some cases. And I had quite a few of them read through the book, and they were like, "Oh, this is just so much easier to read than a lot of the philosophy we do. Like, I understand I can follow along very well. I know exactly what the arguments are. I can figure out where I agree and disagree. And that, like, hearing that was really good because, like, okay, so I've got people whose English is not their first language going, I can follow along with everything that's happening here. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to hear.
Oh no, absolutely. If we're going to compare this to other philosophical books, like this is a very easy, understandable, yet it's also very intriguing in the concepts you bring up where it's
Mhm.
not elementary or like basic or immature. You do bring a lot to the table, but again, that's one thing I really love about your writings is because you put it in a very simple to understanding way. As smart as you are, you can dumb it down for someone like me and a lot of other people so that we can actually get what you're saying from your letters and articles and books. So, I mean, and that's hard to do. So you really have a knack for that.
I appreciate hearing that because it is hard to find people who can do that well, and it's something I really strive towards to do that well.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, and that's really cool, and I really I hope more people can definitely check this out. Now, it's interesting because I ordered this book and I emailed you right away concerning this because I didn't know if I had the only copy. But guys, I have a super rare Dr. Ryan Mullins Eternal Love book because when you open it up from the very front right here, it's blank. And then we have part of the big bibliography, page 156. And then it goes backwards. So Dr. Ryan secretly knew that I read Hebrew books, and he wanted to send me one that we start from the back, opening it up to the very front, Eternal Love, Hearty Mullins, and then the contents in the very back. So I want to thank you for thinking of me and sending me one just like this. But I was nervous because I thought every book was like this because why would this random one be like this? I emailed you right away, like, hey, dude, like, and I think I did, I think I sent you some pictures so
You
that you
did,
knew
yeah.
what I was talking about. And you're like, oh no, let me talk to my editor. But you've never heard anything.
No, I've never heard any of. I've got a bunch of copies. All of them are normal. When I've gone to different conferences to do like some, stuff to promote the book and sign some copies, they've all been just normal. So this is the only case I've heard of where where there's been any abnormality, and the fact that it's just perfectly backwards that's what tickles me the most about that.
Yeah, I don't, it's so weird how like this one copy was. And I mean, I went through because my only concern was I just don't want any pages missing. And
Oh
worst case
yeah,
scenario, I'll just order a second one because I think that this retails for like 20, I can't even remember. Like, was it
it's
like 20,
yeah, I think it's like $20 in the US.
20?
Yeah, yeah.
So now this one, I'm going to put it on eBay for 200. And if you sign it, it's going straight up to 1,000.
There we
So
go.
if you want the super rare, one of a kind, eternal in love, I'm just kidding. No one's getting this. This is a treasure. I love looking for errors in books. It's like my the highlight of my life. Within everything behind me, I found I think three. I found three errors so far, and it's like I don't know. It's like cool. It's like a treasure finding it.
Yeah.
But let's go into some of my questions I have regarding this book. So
Mhm.
one of my first question is like why this book? What was the motivation behind this book? And you can split this up too, but why the name Eternal in Love, a little book about a big God?
So there's a few different motivations. One, my dad for a while has been asking me to write a devotional book that that like you could use at a church, like for like a Sunday school or something. And that's where I came up with the name "A Little Book About a Big God" because that was the intent was I want it to be short and sweet, not too long, and actually affordable. Because I've written all these academic books and they're all $100 or more. No, nobody can afford that stuff. That's nonsense. And whereas I was like, I want to write something that's short and sweet and actually affordable that could be more devotional. As it went along, it didn't. I mean, it is way more devotional than anything else I've written. But there was other things that started coming up too, other motivations. So one motivation was Thomas J. Ord had told me, you really need to write a book about your own views on God that are aimed at the popular audience that could hopefully kind of combat the sort of cult-like mentality that's been developed around certain different classical theists or reformed Thomists. It's like these other kind of movements. And so I thought, okay, that's actually a really good point. So I had these different kinds of motivations. So eventually became, here are my current thoughts about the nature of God. Here is what I think about God right now, at least in a short and concise way that's more devotional than I normally get to do, way more sarcastic than I normally am allowed to do, but yet still clear and rigorous and philosophically interesting.
No, that's totally cool. That's cool that your dad reached out to you and asked
Mm-hmm.
you to do something like that. I think it's, my dad was very prideful, and I don't think he would like ever ask help from me because I think it would like be.
Mm.
I think he kind of viewed it as like I can't go to my son. That's my son. Like I'm the So I think like did it take some like was it a little cool that your dad? You know what I mean? Because you think about like your dad. Your dad's the one that raised you, that taught you,
Mm-hmm.
but now he's coming to you for help. He's coming for you. Like, hey, Ryan, help me. Can you help me with this? How did that feel?
I guess it was slight. It wasn't really because he doesn't have a big ego at all, so it's not like
Okay.
that. But it was around the time where they had started. They'd like the church I grew up in closed. It just died out, and so they had found a new church. They'd been going for a while and were really involved. And then they needed to find a new pastor because the pastor had retired and left. And so my dad was filling in for a while, and he was just, so he was asking me a lot of questions like, "What do you think about this? What do you think about this?" He's like, "You've got to figure out a way to distill a lot of your ideas down to the popular audience for the church. Like this is something you really should do." So it was just part of like him just thinking again about what it means to be a minister, what it means to be a preacher, and going, "You've got Ryan, you've got all this theological knowledge. Like, come on, you could figure out how to do this. You're smart enough. You've got this talent. You've got this ability to speak in an easy to understand way. You could figure this out." And so I'm like, "Okay, let's see if I can." So this was the first attempt at it. It's not going to be the last one, but it's the first one.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is awesome. This is really cool, and I even like how you described it as you trying to come up with the devotional because I definitely got that vibe too from that. I don't
Mhm.
read too many, but right when you said that, I'm like, you know what? Going through every chapter, you have your little subheading there, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, like that is a good word to describe this book as a devotional. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
in a much older sense, not like the kind of fluffy devotional stuff we do now in America, but
yeah,
yeah, like a more old school way of actually contemplating like the deep things, the deep truths of God.
and you saying that, I think one of my biggest thing too, and the reason why I really wanted to start a book review playlist on my channel is because I don't know how you feel about this. I feel like a lot of books regarding Christianity, about God, about Jesus, the apostles, even like commentaries,
Hmm.
they suck. They're just they're
Yeah.
they're not very good at all. And this is just me being honest.
Hmm.
I don't feel like I learn anything. And I mean I've read a lot, and um I feel like because of that, I can help direct people like, oh, I'm familiar with that book. I haven't learned a lot from it. I think a better book would be this.
Hmm.
Um, so because of that, even too, I mean, again, going back to this was a very well written book. And if someone is looking for a devotional to have a better relationship with God and get to know him better, definitely Eternal Love, a little bit about Big God by R.T. Mullins. Get that. Now, the second question I have is within the book, you have so many different sources and resources that you quote from other scholars and other people who have written the book on various topics. So, how much research like went into this book, and how long did it take for you to complete it?
It's a bit difficult for me to figure out because this really is the culmination of like 20 years of dedicated research, like all of my education, PhD, the doctoral habilitation afterwards. So it's a bit difficult to figure out. When I was working on it, when I really started working on it, it was when I was in Finland doing this research fellowship. It was a 2-year research fellowship at the Collegium for Advanced Studies at the University of Helsinki. And my main project was to work on my second book on God and time. And so this little book was a side project that I was doing while I was doing all the research for the book on God and time. And so most of the writing I would say took place there. And then about a year after when I moved to Philadelphia, So probably about 3 years total of just focused writing on it, but a lot of research for about 20 years has gone into this.
Okay. Yeah, I cuz that's what I kind of figured, because from a lot of your articles there are a lot of similarities to a lot of the chapters. I kind of
Hmm.
reminiscence. So I did kind of feel like you kind of took a lot of the foreknowledge and kind of like you said over the 20 years, you kind of just put it
Hmm.
all together in an organized booklet here. Um Now, even like the resources that like you mentioned within here,
Hmm.
um, I mean, that took a lot of time going through a lot of these books. And let me kind of side question:
Hmm.
when you were first writing your articles, under kind of asking these questions that you bring up in this book and
Hmm.
the concepts of God and everything, have how has your idea of God as a father, as this, all powerful being, yet we can have a relationship with him, how has that changed, or what ideas have now surfaced when you were quoting a lot of these people that you do, a lot of the scholars in here? How did that like help increase like your thought process of understanding God in that way?
Mm. Yeah, so I guess one of the things that matters so much when I came to sit down to actually write this book is at that point I had already done a lot of research to trace out all sorts of different theories on the nature of God. So this idea of like there's this one traditional view of God, and then it's only like the 20th century when people kind of reject it. I had fully come to the realization that that's completely bogus. Like that's not remotely true. And I had already published a lot on arguments for and against these different views. So when I sat down to write the little book, I'm really sitting there thinking, what exactly do I believe about all of this? I've published a ton on all these different debates and all these different theories. What do I really think? And then what you see kind of towards the end when we talk about like providence and these sort of theories, I realize I don't know what the answer is. So what I'll do is I'll tell you guys up front, I don't know, and here's why I don't know. So let's look at the arguments for and against some of these views. So part of the process was coming to a lot of confidence about certain things about the nature of God, and then losing my confidence about certain things related to which theories of providence, and then exploring new territory about like why would God create anything at all, and then some of these weird questions about if God knows the future, then what exactly are God's emotions like? So that was some of this stuff was actually brand new material that I'd never thought about ever before. So it was, yeah, so it's basically it's some confidence and then losing my confidence, but then still being able to take a step back and go, God is pretty amazing.
I totally understand that, because I think when you really try to understand God, like you'll lose your sanity.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
it's like just sometimes it's like I give up. I don't even want to touch this topic anymore, because like it's wrapping your mind around infinity,
Mhm.
and totally understanding the philosophical idea. And you're right, a lot of the different theories that have come up, even from early Judaism to Second Temple to before Nicaea, the Church Fathers, after Nicaea, Protestant
Mhm.
Reformation. It's just like I kind of understand where everyone's coming from, but it's like so different, and it just you just almost want to go insane.
It is, yeah, and there's actually a weird history and some folklore about the number of philosophers who try to figure out the nature of infinity and just go crazy, just completely lose their minds. So you kind of throw God in the picture, then you're like, well, gosh, maybe I really could go crazy here. And then there was times in Finland where I thought I was because it's so dark and cold, and so you're just like, am I going crazy? Like, oof.
No, yeah, I mean, exactly. It's wrapping your mind around infinity, which is impossible. But as we go through the first
Mhm.
chapter of this book, it's really cool. It's what is God, and when I first saw that, I'm reading through it. Is this the first question we should ask ourselves before, or even to have a relationship with him? Is that what you think?
I don't know if it's the first question, but it's part of a cluster of questions that you need to ask in order to grow closer to anyone in general, and then God in particular. So if I want to be close to you, I want to know something about your character. Like, like what is it? What is like the essence of you? Like, what are your character traits, your qualities? Then I want to know something about your emotional profile. Like, and then what do you care about? Like, what are you really interested in? What are your cares? What are your concerns? What are your goals? If I don't know any of those things, if I don't know answers to any of those questions, even just like slightly partial answers to any of those questions, there's no way you could say I'm close to you, because you'd be like, well, like, what's this guy into? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what he's interested in. I don't know what he cares about. I don't really know anything about him. And you're like, no. So if you want to be close to God, same thing. You need to know something about the nature of God, a little bit about what God is like. You need to know something about God's emotional profile. You need to know what God cares about, what God's concerned with, and you need to know what God's goals are. And then from there you can figure out, do you actually want to participate in God's goals? Do you want to somehow like try to promote those goals or in projects in some interesting way? I think this is like kind of the cluster of questions you need to ask if you want to be close to someone and if you want to be close to God.
No, that a really good answer. Thank you for that. And I think even too, um, because we can't just like as I'm talking to you now, I can ask you a question, you'll respond. I will hear it,
Mhm.
everyone else will hear it. We can't just say, "Hey, God, like, who are you?" And you're a whisper in our ear, like in a literal sense. Like we
Mhm.
can't have that. Obviously, there's a different relationship, and I think even understanding that God is a father and how he describes himself even throughout the Bible of how he has that relationship to us, we can understand that because of the things that we have experienced. So like
Mhm.
we have a father. Our father gives us rules and instructions. We might not understand the rules and instructions, but we know that if we just listen to our dad, don't touch the hot stove. Well, why? I don't understand. I'm going to burn myself. What does burning yourself mean? What is $300 to the emergency room? Who cares?
Right.
Can't And then
Yeah.
it's like you live through. It's like, oh, now I get it. I
Yeah.
think like when we experience those things, it's like, oh, God is also a father, but he's like an ultimate father. So like we think our dad's awesome. God is better and greater than that. And I think he does those like earthly things to give us an understanding of kind of like who he is, even
Mhm.
too.
What you point out is something that I really try to stress a lot in that opening to the book, which is this stuff takes time. Like you can't, like you don't like get like a super intimate relationship with someone overnight. Like that, those kind of relations, those are really toxic relationships. If you think you've gotten really close to somebody overnight, like these things take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of trial and error of going, is this really what this person is like? And then encountering the world and reflecting your experience and going, maybe not. And I want to say the same thing is true with God, that your journey to try to understand who God is and what God is like, that is a long process of trial and error, of having to experience different things, having to reflect on it. Sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's scary, but that's life. So deal with it and expect it. It's not gonna. Because I just didn't want to do a fluffy devotional that is just it's all like rainbows and puppies and sunshine. Because I'm like, no, that's not what the journey with God is like. It's not like that at all.
Yeah, no, and even when we look at biblical characters like Moses, Job, and even David,
Hmm.
David especially through the Psalms, we have Job yelling at God.
Right.
We have like David yelling at God in the Psalms of like, you this, that, and the third. But then like David will always come up as like, what? You're a loving God. You are there for me. You are my father. You will never leave me. You will never forsaken me. But like, not many people talk about like the argument that goes on. Like,
Hmm.
you know, you have a wife, I have a wife. We will argue with our wife. We love
Hmm.
our wife, but we sometimes have those rustling moments where it's so real and raw I think it's appropriate for sometimes for us to get mad,
Hmm.
to get angry, but like we just don't understand some of
Hmm.
those things of why we get angry or why something is the way that it is. And I think it is perfectly okay to treat God like a father. Sometimes we get mad at our fathers,
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
and it's fine to get mad, but also have an understanding to it too. Like really wrestle, find out why God wants to do something because we understand that God is perfect and God is not an error. So we need to wrestle with what is being presented or what we're fighting with and
Hmm.
to get a better understanding.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what you see me do in the book at various points of going. I just don't know. Let me explain to you. Here's some problems that I have to think through that hopefully you guys could help me figure it out, because it is a journey. Sometimes it is wrestling. And I make that very explicit in the opening of the book of saying, when Jacob wrestled with God, I mean, he walked away with a limp. What I hope for all of you is that as you wrestle with God, you walk away unscathed, but not unmoved by the majesty of God.
No, I love that. Yes, what you said. I read that and was like, man, that was good. That was really that was
I,
really that was really good, because even the last chapter, you even talk about more of like like you're just honest and you're upfront, like that last chapter, as you go through this book, man.
Mhm.
It's it gets really good and really raw. And I mean, like you're asking the difficult questions. And even I wish Christians too can wrestle with this instead of debating an atheist, right? Because I feel like it's better for us to go through these questions together as brothers and sisters within Christ, to go through these instead of facing someone like Alex O'Connor. Have them just completely destroy your argument. And then you're like, you know what? Middle finger to the sky. I don't even understand this. Screw you. I'm
Mhm.
done. Instead of like properly exegeting like the Bible and everything
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
now, it's interesting too, because now throughout the book, you go over, as you just mentioned too,
Mhm.
different attributes of God.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some of the attributes of God?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about God, the basic concept of God is that God's a perfect being, which is the single ultimate foundation of reality. And this is something you see across the world's religions. Everyone who disagrees about what exactly God's like, they will agree on this point, that yeah, God is perfect, whatever that means, and God's somehow the foundation of reality. So a lot of standard perfections. So the standard claim about what it means for God to be perfect is that God has all of these great making properties, or these attributes that you could call perfections. These are properties that make something better, so they're better to have than not have. So things like power, like it's better to have power than to not have power. Necessary existence, like God has to exist. Eternality, God has always existed. God's all knowing. God's uh, perfectly rational. And perfect rationality is really important, because what it means to be perfectly rational is that God is always appropriately responsive to reasons. So if there's a good reason to do something, God's going to be aware of it. And he's going to respond to it in the right way. And there's lots of different kinds of things that could serve as reasons, different values, like beauty, like could be like one kind of value, but moral value is another thing that could serve as a reason to act. So if God's perfectly rational, then he's going to be perfectly good. What that means is that God's always going to act on the basis of objectively good reasons. If he has an obligation, he's always going to fulfill it. If there's some really good consequences that he can bring about from his actions, he's going to bring those good consequences about eventually, because it might take a while to get the good consequences. And when God's doing that, he's also going to be exhibiting like all the different virtues, like love and generosity and faithfulness. He's going to have all those things as he's performing these good actions. So what I try to do is I try to draw out like a nice, neat little systematic analysis of how these attributes fit together. But that's just like a hint of like some of the kind of attributes that I talk about in the book.
Okay. And then now it's interesting within like the whole attribute. I know we hear this all the time, I think, as Christians, concerning like the like nature, and then like right away I think people think of like the divine nature. Now,
Mhm.
how is like the divine nature of God, like what does that exactly mean? And then how is that different from, like, let's just say like angels and demons and like even Satan? Because I think
Mhm.
like I can say angels obviously have a divine nature, I think, right?
Mhm.
Maybe
There's a
you
way
can
of
correct me.
talking that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get into that a little bit more. So to have the divine nature in one sense, like properly speaking, you could say like if you have the divine nature, it's because you have all of the great making properties, all the perfections, whatever is on that list of the perfections. Like we can disagree about them, but whatever all the perfections are, God has all of them. And then God has some of those to like some sort of maximal degree of intensity. So necessary existence, that doesn't come in degrees, because I don't know what it means to exist a little bit more than something else. So God, you either exist or you don't. But some things, they come in degrees. It's like power. Like you could have more power than somebody else, or knowledge. You could have more knowledge than somebody else, or less knowledge than somebody else, and so on. So when you're looking at what it means to really be God, you're saying God's got all those great making properties, all those perfections, and those ones that come in degrees, God has them to the maximal degree. So he's got all the knowledge, all the power. Now, everything else in reality is going to reflect God in some kind of way, or to some extent. And so when you're looking at angels, you could say, well, they're more divine than humans are, because supposedly they've got more knowledge, they've got more power, they've got more goodness than you and I do. Uh, the fallen angels, well, they had a lot more power and a lot more knowledge, but it kind of went to their head, and so they're the goodness part that took a dip. But you can see, like, they're able to reflect God in certain respects with regards to
Right.
certain kinds of attributes or perfections, more so than the rest of us or other creatures. So you could say they more closely resemble God. So you could say in that sense they're divine, if you wanted to. Yeah.
Okay. So then, and then how would that reflect then from like the divine nature, like God's goodness in relation to that?
hmm like which like the angels, or you and I, or like.
Just the divine nature, like concerning God's divine nature, just solely with that.
hmm So, because I think God, goodness and perfect rationality, like they're so tightly connected. Uh, like, to be good again, I think is like you're going to have to be appropriately responsive to reasons, and be appropriately responsive to moral reasons, to moral facts. So if you're good, you've got the kind of character that you can just kind of identify, like, the good reasons to act, like, really well, and and those always serve as really good motives for you to do those things. So for some people, like, they can see, like, the right thing to do, but man, it's a struggle. They're just like, I know it'd be really good to, like, go to the soup kitchen this week, but like, I just can't be bothered. Whereas other people, like, it just, I don't know, it just comes easier to them. Like, it really is like a second nature to them. They've just kind of cultivated that virtue. And so you could say, well, they've got certain good qualities that I just lack. Like, they're more responsive to the good, that to goodness, than I am. So I think that, like that's kind of the analysis there, when you're looking at how closely something resembles the goodness of God.
Okay, thanks. No, that definitely that makes sense. I like the example with like the whole soup kitchen ladle thing. You
Mhm.
know, we to do something good, but then like it's that motivation behind it. But like he has that goodness, that perfect quality, where
Mhm.
he would already just go out and do it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why it reminds me of like the suffering servant kind of where he like towards the end of 53, like it brought joy to have him suffer to do
Mhm.
something good, almost like it's doing something good we have to suffer ourselves to go out there. So
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
that.
and that willingness to do that, whew, like, that's just not a quality that most of us have, and it's not a quality most of us want to have, of just being that willing to suffer and sacrifice yourself for others. Whereas that seems to be a very serious virtue that God has, of that willingness to engage in self-sacrificial actions.
No, yeah, I love that. Now going through this book, I thought it was cool. So one thing I really struggled with um is understanding like kind of like the eternal, which eternal, no beginning, no end, and kind of has a little difference with like everlasting stuff like that. But even as we were talking earlier about like infinity, of like wrapping our mind around it, like you're gonna go insane.
Mhm,
Now, I have a lot of Orthodox friends, and they've kind of explained to me the model of the Trinity from their point of view, and that I feel like makes a lot more sense when we talk about like the Son and the Holy Spirit eternally being proceeded forth. Well, he's outside of it. Um, he's outside of the time and everything. So that is always the whole model of like monarchical Trinitarianism
mhm,
really intrigued me. And even going through your book, you bring up time and stuff like that. So I think one of the biggest questions, atheists bring this up like all the time. How can we understand that God was in the beginning alone?
mhm. So when you're looking at the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, which is one of the, so, okay, so let's take a step back. When you're looking at the concept of God, I said earlier, to be God is to be perfect and to be the single ultimate foundation of reality. And there's different ways you could try to understand what it means to be perfect. You could have disagreements. Same thing with how you unpack the claim that God is the foundation of reality. So one theory, one way to unpack that is the doctrine of creation out of nothing. And so the doctrine of creation out of nothing, it says God creates the universe, but he creates it out of no pre-existent material. And then further, the universe began to exist. What it means for something to begin to exist is that it is preceded by non-existence. That's a fancy way of saying this. At some point, there was just God all alone. That's it. There's no physical stuff. There's no immaterial stuff beside God. There's just God. That's it. And then God brought a physical universe into existence. Now, some people go, well, how do you understand the and then? You've got God and then stuff. Doesn't that mean God's temporal? Doesn't that mean God does one thing and then another? Because if God's timeless, he can't do one thing and then another. And to which I want to say, right, if God's timeless, then creation out of nothing is false. But if you think creation out of nothing is true, then you can't believe in divine timelessness. So, and it's not a biblical idea either. So, get rid of timelessness. Now, here's the worry. You're saying God does one thing and then another? Does that mean God's gonna be the prisoner of time? And usually nobody has a real argument there, but they just keep saying the prisoner of time, it's this really bad thing. And you're like, well, what's so bad about it? And I've written a lot on this trying to figure out what's so bad about it. And the answer is there's nothing bad about it at all. It's no big deal. Here's two different answers of why it could be no big deal. One, you could say time's not a thing in the world. It's not really a thing. Time is just a way of talking about change. So you got God all alone, then God within some stuff. And so you could say before, after there was change. So there's time. And that's a very popular view. I think it's an incoherent view, but it's a popular view. The view that I lean more towards is what's called the absolute theory of time, which says time really is this thing in the world. And time is this thing, this natured entity that makes change possible. So it's more fundamental than change. So it explains why you could have God all alone and then God with stuff. And then time is also the thing that explains the existence of moments. So a moment of time is the way things are, and it could be subsequently otherwise. So we could press pause. If anybody presses pause on this video, well, that's the way things are. And they could be different at the next moment if you press play. So time's got to be responsible for that. And then time has to also play this role in explaining why all the different moments are somehow ordered into a coherent timeline. And so a very popular way of articulating this view is to say that time is an attribute of God. It is proper to predicate this of God, to say God is time. Because God's the thing that makes change possible. He's got free will. He's got all the power. That explains change. God's the source of the moments. And whatever theory of providence you affirm, that's how you get the story of how God creates a coherent timeline. So you could say God is time. And then if someone complains, well, God's the prisoner of time, you're like, God's the prisoner of what? His own essence? Is God the prisoner of his love? Is God the prisoner of his power? What are you talking about? This is a fakakta nonsense. Stop it. Just stop it.
Right. And then, but that's one of the things too. Whenever a statement is made about God, it's 20 other questions then come into play that almost contradict. And it's even going back to this whole beginning thing. It's so difficult.
It is. And a big part of what I've done over the last 20 years is go down all those different rabbit holes, chase all the questions and go, okay, here's the answer that explains all these other answers. It gives you all the other questions, it gives you answers to all the other things. And you're like, okay, cool. Now we don't have to bring it, but then people will bring up something silly and I'm like, oh gosh, okay, let me try this again. So yeah, it's a long process.
And then, so concerning time, then is because I know you brought up the term temporal. How is God not affected?
Well, because time is God is time. So it's not like time is this thing. It's not like it's God's mom telling him what to do. It's like God's power. God's power is not this thing floating out there telling God what to do. So God just is time. So he's not affected by time in any interesting kind of way. He can be affected by other things, though. He can be affected by the things that happen in history, which I think goes back to the claim again that God is perfectly rational. If you're perfectly rational, you are appropriately responsive to all sorts of things in your environment. When God creates a universe, he creates a whole bunch of stuff that he can interact with, that he can respond to. So when really bad things happen, the perfectly rational response is to be sad. And that's why you see in Jeremiah, God saying, like, I wish my head were like an ocean or a fountain so that I could have enough tears to cry for you. Is that a metaphor? It's a metaphor, obviously. But what is it pointing towards? It's pointing towards the fact that God's sad. Like he's really upset about what's happening. Then you see these other statements, like God's angry at your sin. He really is. He feels indignation every day, and you're like, "Ooh, that's a lot of indignation." My goodness. And then you also see these claims about God rejoicing when a sinner repents. And if you think in terms of, well, what's the perfectly rational response to have in those situations? If really horrible things happen, you could be sad or you could be angry. If someone genuinely repents and starts heading down the right path, like what, you're just going to be indifferent, or you're going to be excited, you're going to be happy. And I'm like, you're going to be happy, right? So God's going to be affected in those ways because he is perfectly rational.
No, yeah, that's good. That's good. Now going with that though, um with the acts and human beings, everything like that. I
Mhm.
feel like like if someone does something good, I feel like it would be said that, oh, the person is reflecting like a godlike quality. Like even the term Christian, Christ like, if we are doing
Mhm.
something good, someone would say like, ooh, that is a Christian person, that is a Christ like person, because Christ was a good guy.
Mhm.
So he's reflecting that quality. Now I think too, an argument that atheists bring up, and you talk about this too in your book, um do the positive and the negative acts that we do as created beings from God, do they reflect the character of God? Like, because I think we would say, again, like if we do
Mhm.
something good, oh, he's a godly person, he's Christ-like. But I think then atheists would then turn around and say, oh, well, that's Hitler. He's obviously now also reflecting Christ or God
Mhm.
because he is doing those things. Like, how would we talk
Yeah.
or discuss that?
I think there's a couple different senses in which you want to say a human person, reflects the image of God. One is in terms of certain kind of abilities that humans have. Uh, a bunch of biblical scholars, not all, but a bunch of biblical scholars will say that's what it means to be made in the image of God, is that you've gotten certain powers, like you can think, you can perform free actions, you can engage in rational deliberation, these kind of things. And so, in that sense, you're made in the image of God. Some other biblical scholars will be like, well, no, actually, it's, to be made in the image of God, it means like there's like it's this function, this responsibility that you've been given, that humanity's been given. And I'm like, that's fine, but that means that humanity has certain kind of powers in order to fulfill this role. So you're back to the first position. I don't, whatever. So when you're looking at a case like Hitler, you want to go, that's a bad person. Like, for obvious reasons why you want to say it's a bad person.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what you say, the claim is like he's made in the image of God in the sense that he has these certain powers, these certain capacities. Is he doing good things with them? God, no, of course not. But he has those capacities. So he's made in the image of God, and that image is still there. Cultivating the necessary character to become a friend with God, that's, I think, something separate. So we're all made in the image of God. We've all got these powers, these abilities that reflect the divine nature in some respect. But that's not all God wants from us. God wants us to become friends with him. And you have to develop your character. You have to exercise your powers in certain ways to become the kinds of beings that God can call a friend. So you need to develop certain virtuous character traits like patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. Because you don't want to be friends with like untrustworthy people who lack self-control. These are not. You could be friends with them, but God wants better company, I guess, from us. So when you look at Hitler, you're like, Hitler's made in the image of God. Is he acting in a Christ-like way? Is he conforming himself to the image of Christ by cultivating all these fruits of the Spirit to be kind, become the kind of person that God could call a friend? No, he's failing miserably at that.
I love how you broke that down, and while you were explaining it, it made me kind of even think about like God, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, but like God gives us the ability to be good, to do good, to act as that. Like for instance, like if you and I are putting up a rail for an elderly woman to go down the steps, that's obviously like would be a good thing.
Mhm.
Now, like the hammer and the saw, we can either build it and do something good, or not to sound morbid or anything, like we can unalive her with with
Right.
the hammer and the saw. We could do something very terrible with the tools that we were given. So that makes sense, and I like how you broke that down. Even with Hitler, where he had the opportunity to,
Mhm.
but he chose obviously the wrong way, and that's even something like we can't blame God for. Like even kind of, again, you go through this in your book with the whole free will and everything,
Mhm.
where he obviously chose to act in a different way, not using the gifts for good, and obviously for
Right.
pure evil.
Yeah, the way I do it in the book is trying to figure out, okay, if God wants us to become friends with him, what kind of universe does he have to create in order to make that just possible? What are the conditions for that? And we can get into that more in a minute, but yeah, that's the big idea. That's why I think free will is so important to the story. Is if God really wants genuine friendship with us, then freedom is a prerequisite for that. Otherwise, I don't know. You're just creating these. Everyone always says like creating robots or something, but yeah, you're creating something that has no autonomy, and then there's no real love there if it has no autonomy.
Yeah. Now, going with that, I think this is like the number one question people always ask is like, why would God want to create? Like, if it's in the very beginning, he's again kind of like what you're talking about. If he wants to create robots or everything, like, why create the free will? Why? And we were talking about earlier, like, if he knows the future, why would he want to create this suffering? And like, why create human beings? Why did he do this? And like, why create anything like at all?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's two problems here that I do my best to lay out. What I think about at the moment on this what's called the general problem of creation and the particular problem of creation. And I'm actually working on a much longer book exploring all the options with these two problems. So the general problem of creation is just why create at all, just why create. And then the particular problem of creation is, well, if you have an answer for why God would create, well, now you got to go, why this universe instead of that other universe? Because you would think God's got a lot of options.
Right.
If you've ever watched Rick and Morty, you're like, here's all the possible universes. Like why which one God's gonna do? I don't know. You gotta come up with an answer. So why create? When I'm going through the history of ideas in the Western religions and Eastern religions, when I'm looking at this question, I find a lot of the answers to be utterly disappointing. One of the major answers that you might think would be love. God creates for love, and overwhelmingly, like all across the board, like loads of people go, "No, that's not right. That can't be." And I'm talking like tons of people in the Christian tradition, people even you think who would go, "Yeah, that's got to be it," and they're like, "No, that can't be it." And I'm like, "This is crazy to me. This is nuts to me." I want to say, the reason God creates is to bring about values that would not exist otherwise. There are certain kinds of valuable things that would not exist if God did not create anything at all. So, say God wants to create a universe where it's nothing but some electrons just spinning in the void. That's kind of cool. It's not like really cool, but like, it's kind of cool. Like if I could do that, I'd do that. Uh, but that because that'd be a kind of value that would not exist if God didn't create. The relationship, like loving relationships between God and conscious creatures, like that's pretty cool. Like that would not exist if God did not create. And so these values, these like potential valuable things, those would be motivation for God to create. I don't think they're so strong that God has to create them, but they're motivation enough for God to want to create them. And so that's how I answer the general problem of creation.
And then, okay, so then even with that too, like, do you believe God was possibly lonely as he would have feelings of maybe like sadness or being alone or a need to be with others? Because I know, like, with us, we all have a human need. to want to be with others. No one wants to
Mhm.
be like in isolation. No one wants to be on a desert island by themselves. And if we also reflect like qualities of God, do you think he would also have that?
I don't think God's lonely. There's a couple different reasons why. So one reason would be if you affirm the doctrine of the Trinity, you're like, well, there's what you're alone. There's three persons. Like, what do you? You're not alone. You're not
We're gonna have the
lonely.
third wheel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You could have that, and I feel like there's maybe some awkwardness, being like, well, let's just add some more. So yeah, like you could have these kind of arguments, I guess. But a common claim you see again all across the board is that God is perfectly satisfied in Himself. Like when He looks at His own perfect nature, there's something deeply satisfying about that. That's a source of happiness. In fact, is the source of ultimate happiness, because that's where our like ultimate happiness lies, is in the nature of God. So this is a common claim for why God would not be lonely or would be dissatisfied or would need to create. You could still like there's still some views that say they don't say God's lonely, but they'll say that part of what it means to be good is that you just have to produce more good things. Like it's like a compulsion. Like you're like it's necessary that you create more good things. Like that's one kind of common answer you'll see throughout history. It's one that I reject because then you don't have any God wouldn't have any free will. But it's one move you'll see people make and say like part of the essence of goodness is like you just got to create more good stuff. You just have to do it.
Okay. No, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Now, kind of turning it a little bit.
Mhm.
When going through this book, as I stated earlier, very good concepts going on, and then it gets super interesting. Now you bring up something in this book, and I wrote it down. And it's later on in the chapters. It's specifically chapter 7. When we get to
Mhm.
this book, you talk about the idea of different universes, and
Mhm.
I was just like, wait, what are you talking about? And going through it, and I've never heard of this concept. I'm super unfamiliar with it. But you bring up like what did you say? A Calvinist universe and a Molinist
Molinist universe, yeah, in an
Molinist
open
universe.
universe.
Um, I've never heard of that. I don't think a
Mhm.
lot of people. I've never even heard anyone bring this up. I didn't even understand or even know this was a thing. I don't
Mhm.
know if you college nerds just like to keep this to yourself and not let the public know about this or anything. But like, and of course I say nerds as a
Yeah, yeah,
popular thing. Like
yeah,
all
yeah,
my friends now are nerds. Like I used to be
yeah,
friends, everyone who plays football and all the cool kids, they're all still living with their parents, you know, working at McDonald's. So
yeah.
the nerds are the cool kids. So it's cool to be called that. But like, what is this?
Mhm.
Like let's talk about this for a second. You do in the book, but this is such an interesting concept.
So here's what's going on in theology is there's this big question about how does God providentially govern the world, and you've got these different theories of like Calvinism or what's sometimes called theological determinism, or you've got Molinism, or you've got open theism, and these are different views. What I decided to kind of recast it as this deeper question of okay, I just answered why God would create it all to bring about values. Well, now what kind of universe is God going to create? And when I was looking at a lot of these debates over these different theories of providence, I noticed that there was this way of talking where people were saying God could create this other kind of world that's governed according to open theism, but he wouldn't do that because he's a Calvinist God. And I'm like, okay. And I saw the open theists doing that too. And I'm like, we're basically talking about different possible universes that correspond to these different theories of providence. So
Right.
so let's just do that and just go, all right, fine. What are God's options? God could create a universe that's got a completely open future, so it's an open universe. Or God could create a universe where it's got a completely settled history of exactly how it's going to unfold. Uh, and the reason it's going to go that way is because God causes everything to happen. And so it's a Calvinist universe. And then a Molinist universe, there's some more weird concepts in there where it's like there's a settled history of exactly how it's going to go, but God's not directly causing it all to happen because he gives you this more robust kind of freedom. And so I'm like, okay, these are your three options for what kind of universe God might create to bring about his purposes, his goals. Now let's look at the reasons for and against each one. That's the way I set up that chapter.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I don't think anyone would ever ask themselves, like as you just talked about, like what type of universe is God going to create? Like that's a weird question, and I
Mhm.
was so intrigued because I remember I forgot what the exact chapter was, but I'm reading. If I remember correctly, it was on the right side. But again, my book is different than
Yeah.
everyone else's, and we're talking about the Calvinists, and I think even Calvinism's different because it has the predestination and then it has even double predestination.
You've got these kind of nuances, and I set those aside
Yeah.
to look at the really underlying core claim of like God's determining everything that happens.
Yeah, that it was very it was very different. I've never even gave any thought to it.
Mhm.
Very interesting chapter. Um Now, the last chapter was cool. So as you go kind of go through this entire book right here, you you're bringing up all these um ideas, these questions. You bring up what other people have said, and you know you'll put your thought into it. Now, one thing I really like about you, and guys, again, I brought this up in the interview. Please double check, go watch that interview. And one thing I like about you too is you won't give a crap answer. As in, like, if you're not sure on something and like you're just like, dude, I don't know. Like, I'll give you the best answer I have, but I don't know. Like, you can be very real. And you're very you allow yourself to be vulnerable. So like in your last chapter of the book, you know, you bring up the vulnerability of yourself trying to have a better relationship with God. And
Mhm.
I think that's cool because a lot of us who have 0 degrees whatsoever, we look at someone like you, you're Dr. Ryan Mullins. Obviously, you have a PhD, you have a thesis, you've done your research, as you said earlier, over 20 years of this, you know what you're talking about. And I think for us to even like, wow, looking at someone like Dr. Ryan Mullins, he has struggled. He has opened up about his own struggles with understanding God and everything like that. Where it's almost like it's more relatable, and I feel like it puts us back on that same level of, hey, we're human beings and we're still trying to figure this out. So if I'm 80 years old, like on my deathbed, I still haven't figured this out, I shouldn't be too mad because Dr. Ryan Mullins, he has wrestled with this too, and I think other people too. But you're very honest, and I feel like that's not always present. Not saying the other people are dishonest, but you are willing to put that out there on Front Street to make it known. So, how should Christians understand the foreknowledge of God?
Mhm. So there was this weird question that came up when I was writing this earlier book called God and Emotion that I just didn't know how to address at the time, which is if God knows the future, is he really going to have emotions? Like, shouldn't his emotions be like very weird and like, or just maybe not even have any emotions at all? And I thought that's a weird question. I don't know how to answer it. That'll be another book, another paper, some other time. And but this happens a lot. So I put it aside, and then my friends Tyler McNabb and Mike DeVito, they wrote a paper responding to my that book God and Emotion, and that was this is one of the questions they brought up. And then as I was chatting with them and hanging out with them, I was like, man, okay, fine, okay, I'm gonna sit down and just write this up. Okay, I'm gonna figure this out. Okay, I'll solve all the answers, like all the problems. And then so I tracked down all these different people who developed this objection that say like, Ryan, you believe that God has emotions, he's impacted by the world, but you think God knows the future. You can't have that. You can't have that combination of views. And I look at it and I go, why not? Like you've given me no good reason. My emotions, your emotions, all of our emotions, they are responding to certain things that are called tensed facts. Facts about what's happening right now, facts about what like just happened or what happened in the past, or facts about what's about to happen. And we do this all the time. And there's a lot of cases where knowing the future to some extent doesn't really change your emotions that much. So the really famous example is from this guy named Arthur Pryor, where he talks about being anxious about an examination that's coming up on Monday. And his friends could be like, well, Arthur, like, why are you so nervous? Like, like the exam's going to be over on Tuesday. And he's like, yeah. And so what? Like Tuesday's not here yet, like Monday's not here yet. That's why I'm anxious. I'm anxious about this forthcoming exam. Like, sure, at some point I can say, thank goodness that's over, but it's not over yet. So I'm like responding to the appropriate things. And so I try to explain, like, this is what we do this all the time. And then I try to give case examples of like where Jesus does this too. So the night Jesus is going to be crucified, he knows like the resurrection's forthcoming. He's already like told everyone it was going to happen, and Peter was like, I don't know if you should really say that. He's like, get behind me, Satan. It's a whole thing, It's like a whole like moment there. So Jesus like knows he's going to be resurrected. But when it comes to the night of his crucifixion, is he just like, it's no big deal, I'm going to be resurrected? Or is he like really anxious and he sweats blood? He's really anxious, like and you can see
and that's,
why.
I think that's even like one of the coolest passages, because I for a while, even like growing up, I was always told that instance of sweating blood, like, he wasn't literally sweating blood. And then what was I doing? I was in high school, and we were going over something of a condition that, like, when someone's under enough stress, like, it's literally, like, it's real. It's called, I forgot what it's called. It's called something that it's an actual condition to where you can sweat blood if you are under enough pressure. And I was just like, oh my God, I remember that story where Jesus sweating blood. Like, oh, and like, this is real. I'm like, he probably did actually sweat blood. Like,
Yeah.
that was one of the cool things, just
Because it realized how human Jesus really
yes.
was, like how real this is. And that's why I wanted to focus on that passage for this particular argument, to go, this is someone who knows what's coming. He really does. And he knows that the resurrection is coming on the other side. But what's more pressing is the fact that the crucifixion is coming first. And if you're thinking rationally, of course that's what you're going to be more worried about, because that's what comes first. You're like, sure, the resurrection is going to, I'm getting there, but like, I have to go through this first. So of course he's going to be anxious. And if that's the case in just knowing certain things just about the short-term future, then I was thinking the same thing would be the case with God knowing the future exhaustively. Would be like, yeah, God knows what's like coming. He knows all these things that are coming, but like, he's still responding to these moments in a very real and visceral way, because that's what your emotions are rationally responding to, is the stuff that's like happening right now, or just happened, or is about to happen. Those are the more salient facts that rationally justify your emotions.
Yeah, I remember even hearing because you just got me thinking about that now, the whole thing of his death. I remember a pastor commented, and when I first saw the Passion of the Christ, he's like, man, considering his actual resurrection, Jesus would have begged for that.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I didn't make a whole lot of sense. But then when you're like really thinking about it, and I mean, it was horrible to watch. Like, I remember I watched the first time, I cried, and just hearing them the comment of how, like, oh man, that's terrible. I was like, dude, that was a cakewalk. Jesus would have ate that up. If he would have said, if your cup will pass from me, or if I can get the same punishment that Mel Gibson's movie in 2,000 years will produce, if I can get that cup, Father, I'll take that cup, and it was like, wow, like, really, yeah, just yeah.
Yeah. So I think the reality of suffering, the reality of good things that are present to you, like, this is just the way emotions work, and it's rational that they work this way. And I want to say the same thing is true about God. So when you're looking at the case of Jesus, like, sure, like, he knows what's coming, but that doesn't change the fact that he's emotionally impacted by what's happening, because that's just the way emotions and rationality work.
No, that's good. I'm glad. Now, to kind of wrap this all up,
Mhm.
how does omniscience, time, and emotion all work together in our relationship with God? How would you answer that?
So part of our journey towards God is a journey through time. It really is. it's not the sort of thing that, again, like I said earlier at the beginning of this interview, you don't just get that intimacy with God overnight. You don't get a closeness with anybody overnight. This is something that takes time. God is a deeply patient being, and for him, 1,000 years is no big deal. For us, that seems like a really big deal right now, but for God, 1,000 years is not that long. So his patience is much greater than you and I can understand. And he knows certain things about human nature that we're still struggling to grasp. He knows the amount of time it takes us to learn basic lessons, the amount of time it takes us to really embody moral truths. You can be told, like, this is, what it means to be a good boy, and you can be like, sure, whatever, but to actually really understand those things, like when you're talking earlier about, like, your dad's like, don't touch that hot stove. You're like, yeah, you could know that you shouldn't touch those things, but to understand that in a really deep and meaningful way where it really shapes the way you act and behave, that takes a lot of time. And something that God understands about human nature and that God expects and puts in plan up front is that he is in this for the long haul, because humanity, the project of like making humanity into friends, that is a long-term project. It's a long-term goal, and God's in it for the long haul.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you for that. Now, final question.
Mhm.
What is your next project and what book are you currently working on? If you can spoil for us, because I know there
Mhm.
was a book that came after this one that you did, but talk a little bit about that. And then is there any projects that you are working on that you can mention to us?
Mhm. Yeah, so the one that came out just a few months after the Eternal in Love came out was my follow up on God and Time. So it's called From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, and it's an exploration of what it means to say God's temporal. And I also go into a lot of stuff about life after death and evil and a lot of weird time stuff. So if you're really into time, like, there you go. Now, I've got a bunch of different projects I'm working on. The one I'm trying to finish up at the moment, Andrew Hollingsworth and I, we are editing a debate book called Incarnation: Four Views. And all the people have already contributed. They've written up their responses to each other, their opening essays, all that jazz. I have to sit down and format it, which is the most boring thing in the world. But for the next month, that's what I'm going to be doing, is just getting this thing so that way it can get out to everybody. So you can have this debate book on the incarnation. And then there's a bunch of other cool projects I'm doing. I'll just mention one more, though. So there's this project. Someone wanted me to write something called Letters from a Reluctant Theologian, which is just like really short little essays just on a bunch of different topics, written in the way that I write my podcast. So short, thoughtful, vulnerable, charming. This is what the guy said. He's like, you've got this charming, and I'm like, if I'm charming, okay, cool. All right, I'll write in a charming manner. And but there's a lot of topics that were going to be covered in the book that I couldn't do myself. So I decided to get a bunch of my friends to write essays. So I've got people from like all over the world, and from some different religions as well, and some atheists too, to contribute to just their thoughts on this bizarre journey through space and time that we are on, and their struggles of faith, intellectual problems, emotional problems that they're like, working through to just figure out what is this journey towards God all about. And some of the chapters are really funny. Some of them are kind of sad and dark. A lot of them are all very thought provoking, and yeah, it's some really cool stuff it's going to be in that.
Now I'm excited for that incarnation book
Mhm.
about the debate. That seems
Oh
really
yeah.
cool because I've really like I feel like that's really my next main focus. Like I have a series
Mhm.
coming out on the atonement and how kind of like answering anti-missionaries of how the suffering servant is actually the Messiah. It was the earliest view of this, and I kind of break down, but because I'm hearing a lot of atheists bring that up of the incarnation,
Mhm.
um, the, the resurrection, even uh, stuff like that. And I really want to get into that to where I can, because we're commanded to put on the full armor of God, and part of
Mhm.
that is to defend the faith. That is the entire part of the shield, to defend it, and then to put a response like how Paul does in Acts 17:2, where he argues with the Pharisees from the scriptures. And at that time, it was just the Tanakh.
Mhm.
So he had that time of just Tanakh to argue that. And we really need to, as believers, we really need to be equipped. And, I think for a lot of us common folk down here, we turn to the scholars and the people who are educated and who have done the research. And we definitely look for you for ammo. And I'm excited about that one. Is there any date, maybe like spring, summer, fall, winter, possibly next year, when that might come out?
Oh, it'll be this year. So
Okay.
it'll be through Cascade, so the same publisher that did Eternal in Love. And once I finish formatting it, which I've given myself 1 month to do, I
Okay.
can do it. I can do it more quickly than that. It's just it's boring, and I don't want to do it. That's the problem.
Your
Like, it's-
sanity, it needs to be
it,
there.
it does. It does. So I've given myself a deadline of like just the end of February to do this, and then Cascade. They usually move pretty quickly after that's all said and done. So we're looking at probably the summer, most
Ooh,
likely. Yeah. So like
okay.
when I finished Eternal in Love, when all the formatting and everything, and they picked out a cover and all that, it was like a month after I submitted it, and I was like, "You guys move fast." Like most publishers, they're like, "Yes, we've scheduled that for next year," and I'm like, "Okay, well, but it's just sitting there. It's just, but yeah, Cascade's like, no, we're not doing that." So they're ready. They're ready to publish it as soon as I do all the boring formatting.
Well, hey, that's awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah.
All right. I'll definitely be looking forward to that. And I will pick that up. And then hopefully I can like bring you on. Maybe
Mhm.
even during the winter time, we could do a book review of that. Hopefully, a few months. And I hope, hey, just reach out, be like, hey, my friend Will Walk. He really likes how you guys screwed it up. If you can do it
Mhm.
the same for
If you
this
could
one.
somehow do it
Yeah.
backwards again.
Just have one of your guys just accidentally flip one of the just one, not all of them, just do the one. So I can
I'll
send it to
see.
him.
Yeah, I'll see if we could do that. Yeah.
So, well, no, perfect. Thank you so much. Let me make myself big screen real quick.
Mhm.
Like, so guys, here's the book again. Eternal in Love, Dr. Ryan Mullins. Please check this out. This has been a really good book to read. And, like I said earlier, Dr. Ryan Mullins, there's a lot of books within the Christian field I don't feel like are very good. And, I'm not trying to be rude to my Christian brothers and sisters, but I just feel like it's true. I don't know. Like, I like to really dive in, and this book absolutely does this. Very, very well written book, seriously, and I'm super excited now for this new book that you talked about. So, well, thank you again for coming on. I will definitely have you on again. And seriously, thank you, and thank the boss for allowing me to steal some of your time, so I can harass you on my channel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. No, anytime. Anytime.
All right, cool. I will see you guys on the next one. Shalom.